Welcome, Steven Petrow, to the Spark Your Health stage. Steven is an award-winning journalist and author who is best known for his Washington Post and New York Times essays on aging, health, and civility. He is a contributor to NPR, author of 6 previous books, and his TED Talk, 3 Ways to Practice Civility, has garnered over 2 million views. So welcome. We thank you for being with us this evening to share your story and your insights on joy, which I think we all could use a little bit of always.
Always. And it is a pleasure for me to be with you, Katira, and with all of you on this night. And I have a roaming Cocker Spaniel under my desk here, who I hope is preoccupied, but he may make an appearance.
We would love that. Speaking of joy, I mean, we should have just started with the joy that our pets bring us. I actually kicked my cats out of here so you wouldn't see them jump onto the chair behind me, which they frequently do during meetings.
Oh, this time I was doing an interview with a famous person, and he said, "Well, you can leave your dog in the room. I'm leaving my dog in the room." And then in the middle of the interview, the dogs started barking at each other.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, we had to put them in a timeout.
Right. They had to, yeah, at that point, have to go with the flow. And I did want to just hold up this beautiful book that you have created here because it's a beautiful content inside, but the cover itself is beautiful as well. So I hope that everyone will take a look at this book because, and you'll just see from the conversation, it's absolutely the perfect time of year to be having this conversation.
Yes, and we worked hard on that cover, and I like to say you can judge a book by its cover because
Right.
I think it is a delicious and joyful cover.
Exactly. You can say that when you have the perfect meld of colors there. So I want to start, we'll start easy. Maybe, I think.
Oh,
So
easy, and then
we'll progressively get a little tougher.
okay.
But so I want to start with something that may seem obvious, but it might not be to everyone, which is the why behind seeking joy in our lives. You even mentioned that you used to identify more with an Eeyore-esque sort of demeanor. So there are those of us that can get stuck in our ways and think this is just who I am. I'm maybe not the most charismatic person, or joy just isn't for me. So what do you say to the skeptics out there? What's the benefit of looking for joy in our lives?
Well, that's a really good question, and I look at it a couple of different ways. Most of us have gone through some challenging times, in the past, let's just say 5 years, 6 years. You can take the pandemic to start. Um, no matter where you are in politics, there's a winner, there's a loser. We have other issues, climate change, the economy, so on and so forth. It is a tough world out there, and it can beat down upon us. And like a lot of my work, it starts from the personal. So I've been a journalist, gosh, for 30 some years now, and a columnist for probably half of those. And I often take a challenge to me and turn that into a column as part of my own sort of therapy. But in the interim, I get to interview all these experts and to understand more. So at the end of 2017, that was a tough year for me. And my parents both died about 100 days in between. There were 100 days between. My husband decided the midpoint of that was the perfect time to leave. And then my sister was diagnosed later in that year with ovarian cancer. So I don't pretend at all to say that I had more challenges than most people because I don't think I did. They were a little bit squished in the calendar.
Mhm.
And they sat upon me. And I began to think that I needed to find sort of my way out of this darkness. And so I started reading about joy, started trying to learn more about what that was. And first thing I learned was, well, not what I thought. And I think many of us think that, joy is what we experience on New Year's Eve or the 4th of July, anniversaries, weddings, birthdays. There's kind of the big bash, the big bang, ecstatic element to joy. And that is one kind of joy. Um, but there are many others. And once I began to understand, there's serene joy, there's spiritual joy, there's the joy of anticipation, the joy that we find in memory. Um, you know, Two of my favorites are Schadenfreude, which is the joy we take in someone else messing up, which is not one that I endorse. And then its better cousin, Freudenfreude, which is the joy we take in someone's success. So what I'm trying to say is there are a lot of different joys, and once we kind of open our eyes to them, you can begin to see that they are around you and that they are in you. And I started this journey, sort of walking towards them. The book wound up being sort of my roadmap of 28 stops on the road to joy, and what I learned at each step.
I love that. Well, so we're talking about joy, but then we have this counterpart maybe, or maybe we think they go hand in hand, which is happiness. And I think a lot of us out there are looking for kind of that quick fix to happiness. Probably if you go to any bookstore, you'll see, a whole row there of, fix this, fix that, happiness, spread across the stem of the book. So but you make a clear distinction between happiness and joy, and you deliberately decided to talk about joy. Can you explain that decision a little bit?
Yes. And so as I was doing my research, I would say, there were like this many books on joy and this many books on happiness. And they all kind of have the same title, Happiness in 7 Days, Happiness in 30 Days, their podcasts, their workbooks, so on and so forth. I felt like, first of all, happiness was pretty well taken care of. And then we knew much less about joy. And so as I went deeper, I came to understand that happiness is externally driven. So you buy a new car, you're really happy. You get a promotion, you're happy. You're on vacation, you get to post about it on Instagram, you're happy. It comes from the outside, you metabolize it pretty quickly, and then it's done. The analogy I make, I have this food analogy, which is happiness is like the Twinkie that we eat. And it's full of sugar, and you get this huge high, and then you crash. And our friend Joy is the hearty whole wheat muffin. And so it will stay with you. It will keep you full. It will keep you satisfied. And it becomes sort of a state of being, which is really what joy is. It lives within us, and there are ways that we can activate it or cultivate it, but we don't have to bring it or turn it on necessarily from the outside. And the other distinction, and I'm really big on the food stuff tonight. I must be hungry, but uh, you know, happiness, as I said, is usually about me. Joy is about the you and the me, or the we. And part of the reason that we all experienced sort of a dearth of joy during the pandemic was the isolation and the shutdowns that we faced. We were not part of a we in that way. And so the food metaphor here is if I eat, a delicious brownie, I'm going to be happy and a little fatter. But if I make a pan of brownies to share with people, that is joy. That giving, that connection, that kind of communion. So I think in these times also, where we still are a very fragmented and polarized country and society, that's the kind of joy, that's the kind of we that I think everybody is seeking, regardless of whether they're a Democrat, Independent, or Republican.
Yeah, I think next time we do this, we'll have to bring a tray of brownies to spread around. But to touch upon your point about kind of creating this internal space where we are finding that joy rather than the external. I think that makes a lot of sense because, like you referenced, going through a tremendously difficult year, it sounds like it's like the external might not be giving you really the positive stimulus that you're looking for, but if you can kind of internally kind of protect your space and make it a happy space. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go through the conversation, like what are the things that we can do to really seek out those silver linings, because they are there if we look for them.
Mhm.
So you talk about a component of joy being that connection piece. Can you talk to us a little bit about why that connection with others, why does that go hand in hand with joy?
Yeah, yeah. And so I want people to understand that, in the process of making this book, some of it is my personal experience, some of it is of the people I know that I interviewed, and then a lot of it is of experts whom I interviewed. So when we get into like this kind of dissection of joy and its component parts, that comes from a group of folks, very well studied folks called School of Positive Psychology, and they focus on the positive emotions. And they have come to understand through rigorous studies over long periods of time that really there are two key ingredients in joy. One of them is connection, and the other is gratitude, which we'll come back to.
Mm-hmm.
But it is the sense of um, being with at least another or with others that helps us to share what's going on in our lives, helps us to take in what's going on from other people, and that is like that can kind of build. And I talk also about the importance of being authentic and learning how to become vulnerable. And so that is shedding our skins. And most of us do wear skins of some sort. We're born into this world, we're these beautiful little babies. And then to sort of get to make our way through it, we have to protect ourselves. And I totally understand that because as part of this, I went through a process of trying to learn how to, unprotect myself. And so, but there are many benefits to that, and I'll tell you one that happened recently, and it started off kind of painful. I've been fairly open, certainly with my friends and family, that I suffer from depression and anxiety, and at times it's better, and at times it's worse. And right before this book was published, I was going through a rougher time than usual, and I was supposed to do an interview with someone, and I couldn't do it. I just didn't feel that I could do it. So I thought I was just writing the producer and saying, I really can't do this, and I wanted to kind of be honest about it and not make up a story. So I said, my anxiety's getting the better of me. And then I did that classic mistake. I copied like 12 people, and most of them I
All been
didn't,
there.
and I felt so vulnerable in a scary way. I had shown weakness, and that is the scary part of being vulnerable. But then what happened was kind of amazing. Some of those people who I didn't even know, they wrote me and said, "Me too, my family, I hear you." And then others that I did know a little bit did the same thing and even called. And then, so that was the connection that actually they held me, and I was able to sort of respond back. And that's the one kind of connection. I talk in the book about, you know, some friends here, they have dance parties from time to time, and then you have like 20 or 30 people. And my friends Ashley and Peter, they're set up for this. They have like a fog lamp, they have the disco ball, they've got the flashing lights. But you get out on the dance floor and you're moving with people, and you kind of have that rhythm, and you feel like you're part of this one organism rather than 20 different types of people. Um, so there are all sorts of ways to find connection, and there are different chapters in the book that kind of show us how.
Yeah, I first of all, dance party, love it. I have a
Yeah,
5-year-old. We're all about that.
there's a great list of dance songs in there, and
Oh yes,
even my younger nieces who are in their 20s approved.
they approved. Okay, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And I would imagine the effect of that is really long lasting. Like you mentioned, kind of the whole grain muffin versus the Twinkie. That it's if you've had a great time, an hour dancing, and first of all, you're getting the positive effects of just the movement and the physical
Right.
activity, but then that connection. And I find I think we'll get into memories a little bit later, but having that positive memory to lean back on when, say, a week later you're not feeling so good, you can kind of lean on this amazing night that you had dancing with friends. And it also reminds me of just like taking a moment to think about every day, how do we want to show up in the world? I think about, when people say, a smile, just smiling and being kind to someone that you're passing by on the street, that could be the best thing that happens to them that day. And I know for me personally, that's something that I've been trying to be very intentional about, is how am I showing up and trying to make someone else's day a little bit better? Because I think the universe will have my back when I'm having a bad day. Maybe someone will do something kind for me.
It's absolutely true. And a moment ago, you asked me about why joy, and I sort of left out an important set of reasons. Um, a philosopher once said, we can't live without joy, but medical science now also can tell us that feeling a state of joy, it helps our physical health. It lowers our stress. It lowers our blood pressure. Um, it betters our mental health. So there are many documented reasons why, the release of endorphins and dopamines and so on have, a powerful benefit to our health, which is, of course, another reason to do this, because generally we feel better when we have better health. And I know we're sparking people's health tonight.
Exactly, through every way possible. Joy,
We're going to
movement.
do the calisthenics in the intermission, right, Katia?
Exactly. Well, yeah, and then we get to eat the brownies after.
Exactly.
So I'm glad you mentioned gratitude because I definitely wanted to spend some time there. I actually have a 5-year-old who I've been starting a gratitude practice with, and it's really interesting because the initial response at the end of the day is like, I can't think of anything. It's hard to remember, and really kind of intentionally saying, I want us to think back on the day because I know there's a lot of goodness there, and intentionally pulling for those silver linings. But so talk to us a little bit about how joy and gratitude intersect. And I know that you did some practice with this that it seems you found very beneficial.
And this goes back to my being an Eeyore in the beginning, because I was talking to one of these psychologists, and he said, science says if you fill out a gratitude journal or just write down at the end of every day, you don't need a journal to do it, 3 things that you're grateful for, you're going to feel more joyful at the end of that 3 weeks. And I was like, really? I don't think so. First of all, it seemed too easy. And then it seemed too hard, Katira, because I thought 3 things to be grateful for, that's not possible. But, because I'm always a human guinea pig, I got this little gratitude journal. It's like $5 somewhere, and it was set up so that it asked you if you did any exercise, what your mood was in the morning, and then what 3 things were you grateful for. And I found that most of what I was grateful for were the small things. And, it was kind of, I think my fear was I needed to be grateful for world peace, something like that every day, which does not happen pretty much any day. But the things I was grateful for were, making dinner for friends, going for a walk, with my dog, doing one of the New York Times puzzles and not being, a total loser. But most of them had to do with friends and family and those connections. But I found that it really wasn't so hard after all. And then I went back and talked to the expert, and he said, yeah, it really is in the small things, and that there's a teaching lesson in that we don't need, the big bang things to be happening to us to feel gratitude, to feel grateful, and then to, have the joy that emerges out of that. So that was a very powerful experience. And I even remember I'd started it before my dad died, and after my mom did. And I thought, well, on the day he died, I'm just going to be sad and feeling loss. And but my family had been surrounded by friends. We'd been supported, and they were present. And they brought chocolate ice cream that day, and that was one of the things I was grateful for. Um,
Right.
so I think it's a very low risk and a great reward for people to try. And there are all the things in this book are free. There are no gimmicks. I'm not selling anything, and I don't think they all work for everyone, but I think many of them work for most people.
And is this now a forever practice for you? This is something that's just
Yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah, hold on. I'm in my office, so um, excuse me for running off camera, but
you'll be, oh, look at that. So you'll be
I've
your
been doing it since
accountability, your
I've been doing it since
accountability partner.
2017. So they're like all over the house, and these are the new ones. That's good.
Isn't it fun to look back on them too? Like I have some stacked away and I'll look back like 5 years ago and say, oh, that's interesting that that's something I was grateful for that day.
Yes. So, do you mind if I ask you? So, in teaching gratitude to your 5-year-old, how are you doing that? How are you conveying that?
Basically, the same way that, it's basically the end of the day. I was doing this practice for myself, and then I said I should probably try to introduce it to her. And so we're not writing it down yet, but we are just talking about it when we read our story at night. I'll ask her, what's one thing that you're really grateful for today? And it's interesting, even for a child, the pattern that I've noticed is, say we went on a big trip somewhere, it's probably not going to be like, oh, we went on this ride or we went to this big pool. That's usually not the thing that she's saying she's grateful for. It's usually like, I really liked I really liked snuggling on the couch with you for 5 minutes. It's like I wonder what it is about just those little things.
They're comforting. They feel good.
Yeah.
And the fun thing about going, if you do it before going to bed, because before I went to bed previously, I would like stew about the day. I would be going through my list of grievances and then I'd fall asleep. And then I'd wake up right in the middle of my list of grievances. If you fall asleep having thought about your list of things that you're grateful for, you really are in a different frame of mind. And that is part of retraining the brain to
Yeah.
cultivate joy.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, I love it. I think that everyone should try to do it, whether it's writing it out or just thinking
Right.
them, but setting yourself up.
Gratitude jar, there are all kinds of ways.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, so on the flip side of meaningful connections with others, you also draw attention to becoming more connected to ourselves. And I feel like this can be harder and harder to do. We have our phones and distractions at every corner. I love that you mentioned Thoreau in the book. I've been a long time. I have Thoreau right here on my bookshelf. He says, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. So there was definitely a little bit of solitude going on in his life. So, how does living deliberately and showing up authentically bring us greater joy? What have you found?
So it's about making the time, making the space to feel. And I don't know about you exactly, Katira, but you have a job, you have a family, you have friends, you have interests. And most of us do. And it's hard enough to balance that or to manage that, I have found. And but there's so much to be learned by making that space to allow ourselves to both be present and to feel what we're feeling. And sometimes that is also scary to do that. I always say I'm very big on compartmentalizing. So if I have a problem, I can just put it in that container and it'll stay in that container until it doesn't. And then it's a leaky mess. So taking some time to practice solitude, which can be, it can be 5 minutes a day, just taking a walk and putting your phone aside, and sort of observing what's around you. One of the first things I did when I was sort of on my road to joy that I didn't even know I was on my road was, so I did have my phone in this case, but I was taking pictures of things that I thought were beautiful and joyful. And I started posting them, and then people were liking them, and then I liked that they liked them, and I got that dopamine thing. Um, but then I realized others started using the same hashtags, and we were speaking to each other. They were using joy and joyful, and beauty is everywhere, and doing their own photos. So again, it was the sharing aspect, and that was kind of you know allowing how we see the world to be shared with someone else, but also to, make sure that you see it. I have a t-shirt that says choose joy. It's kind of too cold to wear tonight, but um, that is part of, the mindset I'm asking people to try to take on.
Mhm.
Choose joy. We often, are you going to wake up on this side of the bed or that side of the bed? So I try to wake up on the choose joy side of the bed, but I also want people to know, you know, this is still an ongoing practice for me, as is life. And
Mhm.
um, you know, I I'm sort of, I guess, in that self-help category of books, and I find it challenging when when authors say, well, if you do A, B, C, and D, you are going to be 100% this way. Um, the best I can say is you know, if you do many of these things, but also ideas that come to you that are organic to you, and practice them and focus on them, and try to see the joy, find the joy in a day. That will probably change how you feel about yourself and those around you. And again, science does tell us that too. So it's not just me, you know, sprouting off here.
Yeah, and I think about leaving space to connect with yourself. I bet we'd also find in that space joy. The things that made us joyful 5 years ago might be very different than they are today, or what made us joyful 20 years ago. So is there a little bit of that in the practice as well as, because I do think there are things that just become habitual. Alcohol is something that comes to mind where people will just go and pick up a glass of wine, even if they're not really actually in the mood for it. It's just a habit at that point. Well, this is what I do when I, want to feel happy or when I feel sad. And so I'm just curious if you uncovered anything with habits and kind of revisiting where am I now versus where I used to be.
Yeah, well, habits are a big part of this, and scientists tell us, behavioral scientists say, if we can change our behavior for 30 days, then we are breaking a habit. So if it's alcohol and you've sort of been socially drinking, forever, and you go 30 days, you're going to have a different relationship with alcohol. And so that's also sort of why the 3 weeks of the gratitude journal, you're kind of breaking something and then creating something new. Um, I think over time, that's an interesting question that I have not been asked before, because in a sense, if we're looking at gratitude, if we're looking at connection, if we're looking at kindness, those are going to be static, but how we choose to experience them will certainly evolve, and will differ. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, an example is at the very end of the pandemic, I was still going through what in the past has brought me joy. And tennis came to mind, and I had not played tennis since I was 17, and a mediocre tennis player at 17. And then I stopped because I didn't have time to play. And I played. We have adults have a very strange relationship with play, and so I started playing. I was terrible. This is I'm 64 or something, terrible, but I'm loving it. And every week we weren't playing games really, but I would be the worst, and I was still loving it. It was fun to be around people. It was fun to let go of I have to win and sort of embrace my suck and embrace, this notion of just being here with that. And sometimes it's outside, sometimes it's indoors. But that was really sort of a new like modality for me, that I'm sure, I know the pickleball players in our world will really resonate with that, and they hate me as much as because we're all trying to get on the same courts these days, but it's all good, and
It's all good. We
it's
we
all
have
good.
plenty of pickleball at the 92nd Street Y. But
Yeah,
I do imagine that's kind of the fun in the gratitude journals also, is it's like leaving these little breadcrumbs of oh yeah, this is something that I really enjoyed, and now I've evolved since then, or I haven't evolved. This is something that I still enjoy.
yes, and board games was another thing that I went back to, and that reminded me both of my childhood, as well as there were new games and new sets of friends to play with. One idea I have in the book, which might not seem obvious at the outset, is the importance of handwriting a letter to someone. And so it's curious, most of us don't handwrite very much anymore. And I fear that some of us can't handwrite at all. Um, but the time that it actually takes, you know, between pen and paper and brain, something goes on that's much different than, being at a keyboard, and allows you a little bit more of that space to think about what you want to say, to feel what you want to say, and how you want to connect to someone. And then our handwritings are really, another way that we can see into each other. And I think, probably among my best friends, I don't know what their handwriting looks like. And I think almost that's an important part of ourselves that we miss. But I have letters from my grandparents and from people in my family, and I immediately look at their cursive writing, and I remember happy times, I remember great dinners, I remember terrible dinners, but it's very much a path to the past, which could take us to memory.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's so interesting though, because I write also, and I now that I'm thinking about it, I've always had a difficult time trying to write a story on the computer. I have to handwrite it first and then transfer it. So that's interesting that you pinpointed that. Maybe that's why. Um,
Well, I will like to hear that once a year. So that's not very efficient, I will acknowledge, but once a year I do handwrite a story because, and I have a Pilot G2 pen and I have a yellow legal pad, and that is that's my place in space.
yeah, yeah. Well, I was going to jump into getting lost, but if you have anything that you want to mention about memory, because I know I'd love
Well,
to hear.
I was just thinking that, there's some days where it seems like everything around us is black and that we can't find the joy. We can look here, we can look there. And I certainly, experience those days, acknowledge those days. So there are two other practices to think about. One is looking to the future. This is called anticipatory joy, and for obvious reasons. And I say it's useful to always have two things to look forward to, sort of one in the near future and then one a little bit further down the road, and then you keep them rolling, because those should be things that are going to bring you joy. You know, whether it's someone's birthday party, whether it's you know, going on vacation with loved ones, whatever that is. So joy can be in the future, but in the same way, that I'm talking about handwriting and seeing back to family members, memory holds many joyful experiences for us, and that is also accessible to us when we put it on the table of this is how we can experience joy. And my friend Jeff Warren, who is a fantastic meditation teacher based in Toronto, he uh, he did a joy of memory meditation with me that's in the book, and so people can follow that along and then come to a place that does give them joy. And he asks you to name it with shorthand. So it could be Summer of Love, it could be Market Sunshine, which is his, and then you only need to think of the words to go back and experience the memory. So it's a shortcut, it's a hack, as people say.
So interesting. It reminds me of like smell too, that certain smells can quickly bring you back to
Yeah.
to a positive memory, hopefully.
Yeah.
Oh.
Most of the time.
Well, one of my favorite tips in the book, this just resonated with me so much, was about getting lost. Because I do feel like, especially with, we all have Google Maps or Waze on our phones, and I think about my mom who is just much better at directions than I am. She grew up like driving to the West Coast without a map or anything, and just kind of figuring it out. But I do think there's something there clearly, because you've researched this and found this out. So tell us a little bit about the value of maybe not being so direction oriented or knowing exactly where we need to go that specific day. What's the value there, and how does that connect to joy?
So again, that's creating a time and a space to be in that free moment. And I'll tell you this, the thought originated a while ago. And when I bought a car and I told them I did not want GPS, and they were like, how could you not want GPS? How will you ever get anywhere? And what I was worried about and what I had started to see was that I really didn't know how to get anywhere myself anymore, because I would just follow the directions but not pay attention to the landmarks or the street signs. And so I would go from A to B and miss what was in between. So then fast forward, I had a friend, and he suggested one day, out of the blue, he said, let's get lost. And I had no idea really what he meant at that point. I thought maybe he was thinking we should listen to the Chet Baker song. you know, but he said, no, I really mean it. I want to get in the car with you. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, and we're going to go across from San Francisco to the East Bay, across the Bay Bridge. And then we're going to make a random series of left, right, left turns. And after 45 minutes, we're going to see where we are. I was like, so here again, I was like, really? And then I'm like, how are we ever going to get back? So I jumped to point B before I did any experiencing of the trip. So we did that, and we had this sense of being on a real adventure. Um, we weren't far from civilization, so nothing terrible was likely to happen. We saw places that we would not have seen, and then part of me wishes the story ended with we ended at a beautiful cliff looking over the ocean, and it was all perfect. Well, we wound up at a chemical power plant. The road dead ended. We had to stop. There were gates. There were smokestacks. It looked like um, fierce and scary.
Yes.
We had taken ourselves, on this trip, and people say often, it's not about the destination; it's about the journey. So that part is definitely true. But I would also add in it's the companionship. So, we got lost together. I think getting lost with someone else is always a good idea because, I do suggest you can just go out in your city and start walking, doing these lefts and rights, but you might want to have someone to be accountable to. But there was it was so much fun. And fun again is part of where, the PlayStation that we find joy.
Yeah.
And we did get back.
Thank goodness.
Here I am. We did get back.
And you never know. Maybe you could, on the next journey getting lost, you could end up at a cliff overlooking, an ocean or a beautiful pond. It could happen.
There are many of them.
Uncertainty.
We are drawn to beauty, and yeah.
Yes. And there must be something there about, stepping out of the comfort zone as well. I mean, I remember, this was probably 10 years ago at this point, going through a difficult time in my life. And in West Virginia, they actually just made the National River Gorge there a national park. Not that long ago, and there's a bridge walk that you can do over this gorge, and you're so high up, the people down below they look like ants, and you're on this tiny little metal beam underneath the bridge, and the bridge is shaking from all the trucks going overhead. And I was so invigorated, and it just kicked me right out of the depression that I was feeling. And so there really, I can see that connection from my own experience, and from you talking about it, how stepping out of the comfort zone can just kind of trigger something in us to tap into that joy.
You're so right, because many of us, including myself, we live in various ruts. It's kind of a harsh word, but and they hold us, but they confine us. And I remember I had a Jack Russell before I have this Cocker Spaniel who's roaming around the house. I don't know what he's doing. And I always used to go out of my front door and go clockwise and do this walk for years. And then one morning I woke up and I said, oh, I'm going to go counterclockwise and see what happens. It was so shocking. I felt like I'd never seen my neighborhood before, and I had not seen people. It definitely just something small like that made a difference. And I guess people who are out going counterclockwise were a little bit earlier, and so I got to talk to them. Jack Russell was happy any which way, as long as he got to mark.
Yeah, it's like just change up your commute. Like there are little things that you can do to kind of kick yourself into that more joyful spirit. So to shift a little bit, I want to talk about the connection that sorrow and joy have together. I know, for me personally, I've felt this. I had a dear family member who passed away, had raised her son and he was almost about to graduate from law school, and then he graduated, and that moment was very happy. There was a lot of joy there that he had made it that far in life, but there was also sorrow that, that she wasn't, the mother wasn't there with us celebrating. So talk to us a little bit about how the two go together and how we might be able to find the silver lining even in a sorrowful moment.
Um, I just want to note that I see we have a great question from Michaelia, and I know we'll get to that in a little bit, but I hope
Yes.
others will uh, put up their questions too, because they're always the most interesting part of talks like this.
Yes.
Um,
Please, yeah, take your question. Mhm.
it's an interesting relationship between sorrow and joy, and at first it might seem antithetical, um, and it did to me. Uh, but then, I did a lot of reading of poets in this category, and one of the poets that I read as a teenager, and I've decided not to be embarrassed to acknowledge that I read, Khalil Gibran, who was kind of a cult figure at the time, but he wrote a lot about how sorrow and joy are intertwined and how we really can't experience joy if we don't know sorrow. And I've thought about that, and if I know many of us are bemoaning, sort of the fact that darkness is coming sooner now that we've changed the clocks. But it also helps me realize how much the darkness allows us to appreciate the light, and how, again, they are connected. And if we lived in a world where I think it was light 24/7, I don't think it would have the same impact on us at all. It would just be that would be static, that would be normal. And if we lived joyful lives, or what seemed to be joyful 24/7, 365, um, I think we become sort of immune to it. Um, so that was kind of, the framework for this. And then, I mentioned when we started talking that in the year 2017, my sister had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And during the course of the year since then, um, she she went through many rounds of chemotherapy and other types of treatment, and she died last year, which was obviously that was not obviously, but that was incredibly hard for our entire family, and for me. We were very close, and there was much grief. Um, but knowing that she was ill, and this is a lesson I think I'm taking elsewhere, we were much more intentional about the time that we spent together, the things that we did together as a family. And we went back, we went away as a big family, and we played cards and we did canoe races. We were sort of our kids a little bit more, and we had the new generation. But there were so many new stories that we created during those years that now now are part of memory. And then in the most literal fashion, her birthday was about 3 months before she actually died, and she had stopped treatment, so she knew this was, it was on the horizon. And she said, "I want a birthday party." And I said, "Okay." We all said, "Okay." And so we had this party that had two cakes, and there was sort of the birthday cake, and then there was the goodbye cake, and the party kind of mixed birthday toasts with the things that you would say at a memorial service. And Julie said to me at the end, "Well, I got to be at my birthday party and I got to be at my memorial service." And that expression of love and care and affection also, was a form of joy. And uh, and one that, even as I'm talking to you about it now, I can feel that. So again, our friend Joy is in many places, and and the hard cracks, the bad cracks in the world. Maybe we should think of them as letting the light in, letting the joy in, rather than being something ugly or broken.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing that. As much as I want to continue the conversation, as you mentioned, we do have some wonderful questions coming in, so we will go ahead and jump to those. So let's start with you. You addressed this a little bit. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Let's jump down to this one that you saw. So Makala says, "I love how you started playing tennis again, which was such a joy for you in the past. On the flip side, can finding joy from past experiences in the present have any effect on how we process or view past memories or even traumas?
That's yeah, I sort of seen that up on the chat window there, and that's there are many layers to that question.
Hmm.
And
Good one.
yeah, I mean, and if I just stay with my tennis experience and go back to being a teenager, that was yes, I enjoyed tennis, but at the same time, my teenage years were challenging to me, and had I was gay, but I didn't know that I was gay. I was dealing with a lot of that. I was depressive, but I didn't know that I was a depressive, so I just was sort of living in the dark. And there is that possibility that going back in time will take you to a troubled time. And so we have to be careful about that too. And if you know that you're susceptible to that, or that you're taking yourself someplace that you might feel troubled or challenged, skip that one. Go to a different place. Uh, None of this should be to put anyone in a psychological place that is not comfortable for them. And that's a choice I hope that we can make.
Yes. All right, so let me see if I can break out this question a little bit. It's a long one. Along your journey to learn about joy, did you come across any information on how joy impacts your brain, your body physiology? They've heard that experiencing joy can actually affect our brain chemistry, boosting things like dopamine and serotonin, lowering stress. So you mentioned that a little bit earlier. Anything else to add to the findings along the way?
Well, scientists have this fantastic concept and word, neuroplasticity. And that is the concept that takes me from having been an Eeyore to a Tigger, which is to say, you can retrain your brain in various ways to become an evolved person. I'm not going to say a different person. And so, in focusing on joy, I would say that I am now a more steady state, joyful person, and that the dopamine and the other hormones that are released, are part of that. Um, and we've seen even more studies when it comes to empathy. You know, are some people just born cold-hearted? Well, no, but some people do kind of grow into that, but through various practices and techniques, they can develop the empathy muscle much in the same way that we can develop a joy muscle. Um, and there are scientists who've written extensively on using the data and so on. I'm not the expert on that. I know my friend Jamil Zaki has written about the notion of how we can build more empathy, and that it's not an either or situation with empathy. So
Hmm.
it should give all of us comfort that if you're feeling like you're the type of person who, I can't experience joy, I don't deserve joy, this world is too hard for me, there are things that you can do that will change your brain.
Yeah. So, for some of the country, I want to be very, strategic about how I ask this. This has been a particular difficult, week, stemming from the election. So, how do we tell those folks that are hurting at the moment to look for and find joy when they feel like their external surroundings maybe aren't giving them exactly what they were looking for?
That is a question I've been asked a great deal this week,
I
and
bet.
it is a challenging time. Um, I see my dog is what are you doing? Thanks. Do you want to make a cameo?
And they
It's
know
all
we're
about
winding
it's all
down.
about the ball. He's not playing
Thinking
tennis
about
though.
joy for a dog.
It's
Playing
tennis
thoughts.
ball forever. Um, I have what I have felt is, this is an opportunity for us to try to become more vulnerable and open with each other. And that sounds hard. Um, and it's kind of a joking thing. I say it's really a shame that, the holidays come so quickly after our elections, because we are like in this, 3-week gap between voting and then sitting down with our families and friends. And likely having, some uncomfortable situations. Um, so, what I hope is that we can start to move towards more meaningful, open conversations with individuals, with people we care about, people we feel that we can trust, and explain perhaps why the election results are upsetting to you or frightening to you or whatever reason. And, I always say tell stories, don't use statistics, speak from your heart. And going back to what we were saying earlier, that often allows the other person to both hear what you're saying as well as to respond from their heart rather than from a set of talking points. um, you know that is one notion that I want to bring forward, that in these really polarized times, um, we're all hurting in various ways. We're in an epidemic of loneliness. It's not an epidemic of loneliness for Democrats or just for Republicans. It's for all people and of all age groups, all colors. So that is sort of the larger problem that we face. And how can we find more connection? How can we be more grateful to each other? Um, you know, I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna, because, many people's lives are going to be directly impacted by some policy changes. And, there's a long-standing history of what's called Black joy. And Black joy is the joy found in resilience and resistance. And again, solidarity, being together, having a common purpose. So, I'm shifting a little bit in that direction as time goes on from last week. Thank you for asking that, though.
Of course. No, and I agree. I think that authentic conversation, no matter what you believe, everyone has their own reasons and valid reasons for what they believe. But just having that authentic conversation kind of goes back to what we said about at the beginning about that connection, that even if you have a differing opinion than someone, you can still have a meaningful connection in that moment.
You can, but we've trained ourselves away from that. Social media, most of us don't have friends of different political flavors, and we're used to sort of being in our echo chambers. And many of us have cut off friends or family who disagree with us. So we've lost that muscle, and we do need to find ways to regrow that safely.
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to end with is hopefully something you can help us with, which is let's close out with what can we do today to cultivate more joy in our lives?
Well, I love that, and I think everybody can make their own list. But you know, I'm gonna. We talked about a lot of them. Almost all of them can be done.
You can find a lot more in here.
Yeah,
Like I said,
but
beautiful cover.
so I talk about the joy of taking a pause, and that kind of goes back to freeing up that space, but not being provoked into a response, taking a breath or two and saying, well, how do I want to respond to this? What is the better me in this situation? And that is something that actually can work. There's a longer story about a scone and things with that. Um, but
And you mentioned play,
yes,
getting back into a playful state, which I think it can be really hard to do sometimes when there's just so many things we're juggling.
yes. And, all forms of play, from, athletic stuff where we move our body to card games, board games, or just to being silly. We don't have to have a return on investment in everything that we do. Sometimes that ROI is just fun. And, I even say that, go wash the dishes. And every time I say that, I hear my mother like screaming at me, because we did not have a dishwasher when we were growing up, and my mother generally washed the dishes, and that was her daily practice. Uh, but now, when we have the time and make the time, I say take these tasks that seem onerous in some way and put your focus on them, and allow yourself to do them. Start, enjoy the middle, and finish. Let your mind kind of go in those times. There's something very there can be something very soothing about water and soap and rinsing and so on. So as much as my mother probably hates me talking about that, that is another type of practice that just frees up some space to feel and to feel our better selves.
Absolutely. I think about just the physical work like raking leaves, something I've been doing a lot of. My husband will look at me and say, we have a leaf blower. I'm like, there's something really therapeutic about just raking leaves.
And gardening,
Yes.
cooking,
Yes.
cooking for others. Back to the pan of brownies that we started with.
Exactly. Well, speaking of joy, Stephen, it has been such a joy and a pleasure speaking with you. I know that our community got so much out of this conversation. So we're all going to go out there and get lost, change up our routine. We're going to play, just so many gems that we took away from this conversation. And I hope that everyone will go out and get the book because, like you said, there are a lot of anecdotes in this book and a lot of lists and things that you can draw from. I know my copy is all highlighted up with your suggestions. And we'll certainly be practicing that gratitude this evening. So thank you all so much for joining us. And Stephen, thank you again for taking the time to be with our Spark Your Health community.
Well, thank you again for having me, and thank you to everybody who is out there in Zoom land. See you soon.
Yes, stay well, everyone. Have a good evening.